What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so in this video, I want to talk about the other player that I think is one of the two best players in 1950s. The first half being George Mikan, the second half being Bob Pettit. Alright, so at one point in time, I would say like before Wilt Chamberlain, you could argue that Bob Pettit may have been the best player in NBA history. When he retired, you could make the argument he was the best power forward in NBA history and the second best player or the second most dominant player. And as recently as when I was in high school, you could read that Bob Pettit was still considered the greatest power forward of all time. I still think he's top five-ish. But he has seen a decline in his, I don't want to say legacy, but in his prominence, I guess. And, you know, some of that is time. Time can be an enemy of legacy. A lot of people that watched him play are retired, or actually I'd rather say deceased. More importantly, a lot of people that covered sports at that time are long since deceased or long since retired. So that's what happens, you know what I'm saying? Also, another thing that hurts him, and we got to be realistic, is that even though the league was changing at this time when he played, starting to look something like the modern game, there still was a lot of, there still was a lot of, racial discrimination going on with organizations and not having black players on the team. And unfortunately, the Hawks are one of the last teams to integrate their players. And actually, when you read about it in detail, it's kind of disturbing in particular what Cliff Hagan did. You know what I'm saying? Some people even say by default Bob Pettit because, he should have spoke out about some stuff. You know what I'm saying? But as a basketball player, you know what I'm saying, Bob Pettit was significant. All right. Bob Pettit had career averages of 26.4 points and 16.2 rebounds and 3 assists per game. His 16.2 rebounds is third all time, behind only Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. And when you look at his accolades, he was an NBA champion, 1958. In fact, he is the only reason why Bill Russell doesn't have 12 rings instead of 11. He won the MVP award twice. He was an 11-time All-Star. He shares the NBA record with Kobe Bryant with 4 NBA All-Star Game MVPs. He was a 10-time All-NBA first-teamer. Once, his last year, he was on the All-NBA second team. He was a 1954-55 NBA Rookie of the Year. He was a 2-time NBA scoring champion. He led the league in rebounding in 1955-56. He was on the 25th anniversary team in NBA. He was on the 35th anniversary team. And he was on the 50th anniversary team. His number 9 is retired by the Atlanta Hawks, and his number 50 is retired by LSU. Now, Bob Pettit was born in 1932 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was not, I guess, a basketball phenom, having been cut from the varsity team as both a freshman and as a sophomore. However, his parents encouraged him to improve, to practice, and he did get better. And during his junior year, he grew 5 inches in height, and he improved. And as a 6'7" senior, he led Baton Rouge High to his first state championship in over 20 years at that time. After high school, Pettit had scholarship offers from 14 different universities, but he accepted a scholarship to play at nearby Louisiana State University. Pettit made his varsity debut at LSU in 1952. Back in those days, freshmen were not allowed to play varsity basketball, so he had to sit out a year. He led the SEC in scoring for his first of 3 consecutive seasons, averaging 25.5 points per game. In those 3 years, Pettit would average nearly 28 points per game, with his senior year boasting averages of 31.4 points and 17.3 rebounds per game. And he had a very successful collegiate career. He set many scoring records, which would eventually be broken by Pete Maravich. But after his collegiate career, the Milwaukee Hawks selected Pettit second in the first round of the NBA draft after the Baltimore Bullets selected Frank Selvey. Hawks owner Ben Kerner offered Pettit a $11,000 contract, which he accepted. At the time, that was an all-time high for an NBA rookie. But Pettit was, it was a rough go about it initially for Pettit because even back then the NBA was getting bigger and stronger. And in college, high school and college, Bob Pettit played the center position. But at only 6'7" and 200 pounds, he lacked strength to play that position. At that time, Bob Pettit primarily played with his back to the basket and, traditional center position, but that wasn't working for a guy who just did not have the physical strength. And, he did not have good ball handling ability. So the coach moved him from the center position to the power forward position. So Bob Pettit had to work on his face-up game, his ball handling ability, his passing ability, and something that is quite revolutionary. Bob Pettit was probably the first NBA player to really utilize weightlifting. Eventually, Bob Pettit would go from 200 pounds to about 230, 235 pounds, and as high as 240 at times. So he really bulked up, and you saw this improvement in his game over time. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1955, averaging 20.4 points and nearly 14 rebounds per game. The next year, he would average 25.7 points, and he led the league in rebounding with a 16.2 average. Although back then they went by total rebounds, not average. I don't think they made that change until, I think it was 1969-70 or something like that. He was named the MVP of the 1956 NBA All-Star Game with 20 points and 24 rebounds and 7 assists. He would also win the All-Star Game MVP in 1958, 59, and 1962. He won the first of 2 MVP awards that particular year as well. In 1957, the Hawks would make it all the way to the NBA Finals, where they lost in 7 games in overtime to the Boston Celtics. But in 1958, the Hawks, who moved from Milwaukee to St. Louis in his second year, back in 55, 56, I think it was. In 1958, the Hawks won their first and, as of to date, only NBA championship, largely because of Bob Pettit. In Game 6 of that series, with his team holding a 3-2 lead, Bob Pettit scored a then NBA playoff record 50 points to secure a 110-109 victory over the Boston Celtics to give them their first ever championship. In his next season, Bob Pettit would average 29.2 points per game, which at the time was an all-time record. But Wilt Chamberlain would obliterate that record the very next year, his rookie year. Over the next several years, Bob Pettit would continue to be a high-scoring player and one of the best players in the league, even though as you transition into the 60s, it was becoming a league more dominated by the names of Chamberlain and Russell and West and Oscar Robertson, Jack Twyman, players like that, Sam Jones, Hal Greer. This new generation of players were taking over. But Bob Pettit was still one of the best players in the league. In 1960-61, Bob Pettit averaged nearly 28 points and averaged 20.3 rebounds per game, making him only one of 5 players to ever break the 20 rebound per game barrier. On February 18th of 1961, Pettit scored a career-high 57 points, which still is a franchise record, shared with, I believe, Dominique Wilkins also scored 57 points in a game. So he shares that record with Dominique Wilkins. In 1961-62, which is a notoriously high scoring year in the NBA, Bob Pettit averaged a career best 31.1 points per game. This was probably the fastest era in the NBA in its history. And Bob Pettit would slowly diminish as a player over the next 4 seasons, but he still averaged 20 points per game his last year in the NBA, and he retired as the league's all-time leading scorer with 20,880 points. Over 6,000 of those points, or nearly 30%, came from the foul line. His 12,849 rebounds were the second most in league history at the time of his retirement. I believe he was second to Wilt Chamberlain, who had only been playing for 6 years. So that goes to show you how dominant he was. Pettit was an all-star in each of his 11 seasons and was named to the All-NBA First Team 10 times. Pettit averaged at least 20 points per game and at least 12 rebounds per game in each of his 11 NBA seasons. He never finished below 7th in the NBA scoring race, and no other retired player in NBA history other than Pettit and Alex Groza has averaged more than 20 points per game in every season they played. Michael Jordan averaged exactly 20 points per game in his final season. In 1970, he was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. And after basketball, Bob Pettit worked in the banking industry in Baton Rouge for nearly 25 years before entertaining financial consulting in 1988. About 15 years ago, he retired from Equitas Capital Investors, and he was married to his wife, Carol, for many decades before she passed away 10 years ago. He has 3 children and 10 grandchildren, and I believe Bob Pettit is about 87 years old, I think. I think he's 87. He's still alive. But that's pretty much all I got to say, man. That's my biopic of Bob Pettit. Tell me what you guys think.